Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 43 of Be With Me in the book of 1 Corinthians. Today is Despising the Church of God. It's a great little phrase that's in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And the context is about the gathering for the Lord's Supper, but there's all kinds of great concepts in there. It's about a people that gather together, and they are worse for being gathered rather than better for being gathered. It's a big minus. They harm themselves by gathering because they are despising the church and despising the people in the church. And so, of course, Paul says this is uncommendable and it is unreputable for you to do this. It's unreputable for you to represent yourselves and give yourselves a bad name like this. That is, you're representing disunity, you're portraying disunity, and that's going to have implications with regards to doing the Lord's Supper, because you can do the Lord's Supper, what we call communion, you can do it wrong. If you make the Lord's Supper make it your supper, then you've done it wrong, so that you can eat and drink and do it in an uncommendable way. And then he uses this phrase. So this is the big phrase today, is do you despise the church of God? One of the greatest questions in Scripture. Read with me. This is from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 17. But in the following instructions, I do not commend you, because when you come together, it is not for the better, but for the worse. For, in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and I believe it in part, for there must be factions among you, in order that those who are genuine among you must be recognized. When you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper that you eat. For in eating, each one goes ahead with his own meal, one goes hungry, another gets drunk. What? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Or, here it is, do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I commend you in this? No, I will not, because you despise the church of God. All right, so let's define what that is. Look that up in the Greek. Despising is when you look down on someone or something, with the implication is that you consider the object of little value. So you're devaluing someone or something. That is, you're saying it's not important enough to be an object of concern for me, especially when evaluated in comparison with something else, i.e. me. So here we see them disvaluing the people of God, for sure, the place of God, God himself, and the practices of God, which we're going to get to that, the Lord's Supper. So this is not an optional. This is a commandment that he's saying, that we are supposed to be gathering and having fellowship and having community. So the first question is, do you go, and does the church of God go with you? So that's a question, the bottom line question I'm going to leave us with today is, do you go to church, and does the church of God go with you? Do the people of God go with you when you're not with the people of God? All right, so let's talk about despising the church today. We may be despising church. So how? Well, what do you mean? Oh, that sounds so offensive. Here's how you would be despising the church today. You might be despising the church of God if you think that it is a virtual church. You might be despising the church of God if you think it's an optional church. You might be despising if you think it is an academic church. You might be despising if you think that it is an imaginary church. If you think that it is a sinless church. If you don't think, and you just have an unconsidered thoughtlessness about it. You might be despising the church if you are divided and fractional. You might be despising the church if you think the church is unaccountable. You might be despising the church if you think it's a forgetful church or an isolated church. You might be despising it if you approach it cavalierly. You might be despising the church of God if you think it's a me church. So it's not a virtual church. It is a church that gathers. It's not an optional church. In this passage, it's commanded. It's expected. It's not an academic church. It's not a book knowledge church. This is a church of real people. It's not an imaginary church. Real people. It's not a sinless church. It's a church in which people are rubbing shoulders and have to forgive. It's not a thoughtless church. It's a church where there's consideration about another person here. It's not a divided church. It's a unified church that stands under the Lord. It's not unaccountable. Paul here is calling them to account. It's not a forgetful church. It's a church in which we practice remembrance. And it's not isolated. It's a church that gathers together. It's not cavalier. It's a church that practices remembrance in a worthy way. And it's not a me church. It's really a focusing on a you church, you people and you the Lord. And it's a church that's not about me. It's about the Father. So the question is the church being carried by, are you being carried by the church? Or are you carrying the people of God? So let's assess, can you collectively, or are you collectively failing in the Lord's Supper and the gathering? And I think it's very worth examining here today. Are you despising the church of God? Are you disvaluing and devaluing the church of God? So Lord, help us to see this. Help us to yield to your way. Help us to interact with your people. Help us to give grace to the sinners that we rub shoulders with. Help us to choose unity rather than division. Help us to stand humbly in position before you. Help us to remember and to practice remembrance. Help us to do this in a worthy way at your communion table and the Lord's Supper table. Help us to devalue me and elevate you, glorify you, make you bigger. And Lord, help me not to be carried by the church, but help me to carry the church. So in conclusion, do you despise the church of God today? Do you go? And does the church go with you? Let's think today about what despising the church means. Thank you so much for listening.